Hello and welcome to Spiritual Becoming. I'm your host, C.L. Christoffel, and today I would like to talk about the stages of becoming a developed, kind, compassionate, caring, generous, spiritual person in the world. A true human being, wholeness as a spiritual being, wholeness in becoming. So the whole-on of both a spiritual self, but also the larger whole-on of a societal group. There is a great deal of schism in the world. Basically, everyone has an opinion. Basically, everyone believes, that theirs is pretty important, and justly so. They ought to. I believe in reformations. I believe, in schism in some ways. I believe that we ought to look at ourselves and look at the social groupings that we're in. And in civil social groupings, I think it's important to split, to perfectly define what it is that you believe and want from the world and from your social outlets and social grouping. So I do promote schism in some ways. I'm also a little leery of it in others. There are 38,000 denominations of Christianity-ish, give or take, a few. That's a lot of splitting hairs over just, one religion with some basic tenets. I find that, looking at my worldview, I want very much to bring in commonality. I want to focus on the commonalities between people, focus on the commonality in religion, focus on the commonality in social structures and in institutional structures, ways to bring us together. I am done living in a world of divisions. Now, again, I just said I like some of the divisions because it more specifically defines what you believe. The flaw is when those divisions start to become us and them situations, when those divisions, set you so far against others that you can't find the commonalities anymore. Those divisions, church to church, synagogue to synagogue, mosque to mosque, ashram to ashram, those divisions should strengthen your faith and resolve and goodness and peace and charity. And if it's setting up us and them situations, I think it's doing the opposite. It's creating walls. It's creating injustice in the world. So if the split allows for a larger worldview in order to bring more people in, I think that it's a good split. If it's to hold people away, then it ought to really be looked at, because then that's factionalization. That's, creating these warlike scenarios, even in your personal life. We come into the world dependent. We come into the world made but not fully made. We come into the world tabula rasa, with a blank slate. And then we create, day by day, the person that we see in the mirror, the person that we want to be. We add these traits onto ourselves about religion and politics and, social mores. And we decide to keep some, and we decide to replace some. Some are the internal biases of our parents and our culture. Some are the internal biases of our own personalities. States of dependence can be physical, they can be emotional, they can be intellectual and social. There are lots of ways to stay dependent on the world, on the ideas of other people, on the cultural norms, and those can become ingrained biases. They can become personal biases to the point that you don't even really realize that you have them, and that social norming that comes from your parents can leave you dependent on many systems of the world. The key then is to break free from that. It's not necessarily breaking out of social or cultural things, systems of control, because oftentimes those are how we define ourselves. Those are our worldviews, and it's important, I believe, to have great diversity in those things. So I wouldn't say doing away with those, systems that we're dependent on is necessarily a good thing, just as I believe that doing away with schism is a bad thing. I believe that diversity makes us all stronger, diverse ideas. But what's underneath that is what's important. And by underneath, I mean, what are the underpinnings? What is it built on? What are the piers, the pylons, the foundation that it's built on? And how do we get to that, to building a strong and firm foundation under our beliefs, which then means that our institutions have those inherent beliefs in them because we bring them with us when we join. Moving from dependence, we move into independence. We try to say our own things and speak our own mind and move, outside of the world of the control of other people. And I think a lot of folks get very much caught in the independent stage of becoming. They define who they are, but then they rigidly try to hold that line and hold those boundaries, and they shut down effectively their thinking, their intellectual minds. They shut down their spiritual growth by saying, I have enough, this is who I am, this is what I am, done. Not realizing that there is great gradations of gray areas in our lives. There is lots of room for added shades of meaning that then bring grace, that then allows spirit to come into our lives. Independence gets scary. It can become counter-dependent. And counter-dependent is an independence that leads to oppositional or operational stalemating, building up the factions, the us and them situations, the with us or against us situations. Maybe liberating for a time, to band together with a bunch of rogues and say it's my way or the highway, it's our way or the highway. That essentially is bullying. That essentially is bowling over, other people. And it's not necessarily done from the highest moral good. As a matter of fact, I think in creating conflict of any kind, you are walking away from the centrist. You're walking away from, the moral center of most arguments. As soon as you start setting up these dichotomies of us and them, you're not allowing them to voice their opinions about goodness and grace and kindness. And what it does is it ramps up those counter emotions. It ramps up the conflict, conflict. Another way that independence can split is independence brought together with someone else, where you then create a faction against the world. It's somewhat like counterdependence. There's kind of a rift between, it definitely creates an us and them scenario, but it's a smaller us and them scenario. It's codependence. It's exclusionary of all else, to the point that, like many factions, when you split off, you close the door to diverse understanding. You close the door to, the possibility that perhaps you're wrong. Perhaps there is a better course of action in a given situation. It's often viewed as unhealthy to be codependent, most especially when you're young. It's seen as, kind of isolating and limited, and it's shutting down your interaction with the world. And that may very well be true, but the healthy side of codependence is that it can also, make you stalwart against the horror of the world, and surviving a terrible situation oftentimes leads to that kind of codependent energy. It's like all of the great films you've ever seen, the kind of tragedy films where the two characters come together and they have this bond and they survive together, and then they come out of it, and then they live happily ever after. I think oftentimes when you're coming out of a really traumatic situation, that happily ever after scenario is a codependent scenario, because you always wonder, when's the next tragedy going to hit, and how can we be, isolationist enough to kind of avoid the tragedy. And then you miss the beauty of, building relationships in the world and learning from the world and building your, spiritual prowess up to the place where you are, in line with spirit. If you can jump counter and codependence through an independent mind, you come to realize at a certain place that it's impossible to build a bridge alone. It's impossible to build a skyscraper alone. It's impossible to build a spiritual community alone. It's impossible to live isolated in the world. I don't believe that it's necessarily healthy to be a sage on a mountaintop somewhere. I think that's kind of a cop-out in a way. I think it's important, to take some time to self-isolate in a way, to read and to study as an aspirant. But, as you truly become, I think it's important to re-enter the world again. And I think that you have a responsibility after study to re-enter the world and to find others of like mind, and maybe create that schism and create that offshoot of another group. But beyond even that, finding like minds, but then opening to the place where everyone is allowed in. Realizing that interdependence, that diverse understanding is really the only way to move forward positively. Making certain that the best course of action is chosen in all situations. Interdependence is the best possible way to create peace. I offer you my best. You offer me your best. Together, with those ideas, we find the course of action forward. We work together with the best intention. Interdependence realizes that interdependence, that worldview helps us to realize that there is no going it alone. We want to create then, as Stephen Covey talks about, win-win situations. Cooperation on the highest plane, seeking, preferably finding the highest good for all involved in each given situation. It's a return to shared, universal values. The world is ripe for a spiritual revolution. The time has come. We have to ask ourselves, why do we do what we do? Is it not to make a better world? Are we so concerned with self-preservation that we trample down over everyone? The days of trampling down are over. Is it better to purify than pollute? Yes. Is it better to cleanse than to taint? Yes. Is it better to create health than to spread poison? Yes. We know what the right course of action is. We know when we see people creating destruction in the world. We're in this together. Why not create paradise?